Christmas Eve came riding in on a pale winter sun, low and tired, casting long shadows over the cottonwoods that lined Clay Dawson's ranch, the kind of light that made a man believe the world might finally slow down for a day. Clay leaned on the porch rail with a tin cup of coffee warming his hands, snow crunching under his boots, thinking how strange it felt to have someone beside him this Christmas, especially someone like Madison Clark, a city woman with polished boots and a wool coat that costs more than his saddle. She smiled at the open land like it was a painting, not a place where wind cut deep and work never truly ended. Clay figured that smile was the real gift this year. Madison stepped closer, brushing his arm, her breath showing white in the cold, saying she never imagined Christmas could be so quiet. No horns, no crowds, no neighbors stacked wall to wall. Clay chuckled, telling her quiet was something a man earned out here, paid for with broken fences and early mornings. The house behind them glowed warm, pine boughs hung crooked over the door, and a small tree stood in the window, trimmed, simple, just lights and a few wooden stars. Clay had cut that tree himself, feeling proud and foolish all at once, hoping it might be enough to make her feel welcome inside. The smell of beef roast and coffee filled the air, a fire cracked steady in the stone hearth. Madison had surprised him by rolling up her sleeves and helping cook, laughing when flour dusted her nose. Clay watched her move through his kitchen like she might belong there, even if her hands were soft and unused to ranch work. He wondered if this Christmas would be the start of something lasting, or just a borrowed moment, a city dream drifting through his wide-open life. The thought sat heavy, but he pushed it aside. Today was meant for peace. They sat down to eat early, plates full, the kind of meal that stuck to your ribs. Madison raised her glass. "Two new traditions," she said. Clay nodded, feeling something loosen in his chest. Outside the wind picked up, whispering through bare branches. The ranch settled into that deep winter stillness, the kind where even the cattle seemed to listen. Clay thought about the widow next door, Sarah Whitmore, quiet woman, lost her husband to winters back. He'd fixed a fence last spring, shared a few words since, but nothing more. Grief made folks keep their distance, and he respected that. After supper, Madison suggested a walk, wanting to see the stars without city haze. Clay grabbed his coat, stepping out with her into the cold. The sky stretched endless, sharp with light. Madison gasped softly, saying it felt like the whole world was watching them. Clay smiled, telling her the stars were old friends out here. They walked slow along the fence line, snow crunching, breath steady. Clay felt content, maybe even hopeful. The ranch, the woman beside him, Christmas settling gentle on his shoulders. The silence broke with a sharp sound, not loud, but urgent. A knock carried on the wind. Clay stopped, head turning toward the house next door. A faint lantern light flickered near the widow's place. Madison frowned, asking if someone needed help. Clay's gut tightened. Trouble had a way of showing up when a man least expected it, especially on nights meant for rest. He scanned the dark, listening. Another knock came, faster this time, followed by a voice. Strained and thin, Clay told Madison to head back to the porch, just in case, his voice calm though his heart wasn't. He strode toward the fence, boots finding their way by memory. The widow's house came into clearer view, the lantern shaking in Sarah Whitmore's hand, her coat thrown on, crooked hair loose around her face. She saw him and called his name, panic breaking through her usually steady tone. Clay hurried, the cold biting sharper now, Christmas peace slipping away with every step. When he reached her, Sarah's eyes were wide, shining with fear. She said something was wrong, real wrong, words tumbling over each other. Clay caught her shoulders, grounding her, telling her to breathe, to tell him slow. Behind them, Madison stood on the porch, watching. Confusion etched across her face, the firelight framing her like a picture of another life. Clay felt the pull of two worlds tightening at once, the quiet Christmas he'd planned, and the urgent need of a neighbor in trouble. And he knew, before Sarah even finished speaking, that this night was about to change everything. Sarah Whitmore's words came out tangled and breathless, her voice shaking as the lantern trembled in her grip. She said it was her boy, little Thomas, burning up with fever and gasping like he couldn't pull air deep enough. She'd tried everything she knew, cold cloths, prayers whispered through tears, but nothing was helping. And the storm rolling in had knocked the telegraph line down earlier that day. There was no way to reach the doctor in town. Clay felt the weight of her fear settle heavy on his chest. the kind of fear that didn't belong to one woman alone but spread to anyone standing close enough to hear it. He told her to take him to the boy, now, his voice leaving no room for doubt, and as they hurried toward her house, snow starting to fall thicker, he could feel Madison's presence behind him, silent but close. Her city calm replaced with a sharp worry she hadn't known how to hide. Inside the widow's house the air was stifling despite the winter cold, the stove roaring too hot, the smell of sickness clinging to the walls. Thomas lay curled beneath blankets, his small face flushed, deep red eyes glassy and unfocused, his breathing shallow and uneven. Clay knelt beside the bed, resting a hand on the boy's forehead. The heat startled him. Sarah hovered like a shadow, wringing her hands, apologizing over and over like trouble itself was a sin she had committed. Clay told her to stop that talk. Trouble came for everyone sooner or later, especially out here where help rode slow. Madison stepped forward then, surprising them both. She'd grown up in the city, yes, but her mother had been a nurse, and she remembered more than she'd ever expected. She spoke softly to Sarah, asking for clean cloths, fresh water, anything that could cool the boy down, and for the first time that night, Sarah nodded with something like hope flickering behind her. Fear hours stretched thin and fragile, marked only by the fire's crackle and the boy's labored breaths. Madison worked steadily, changing cloths, murmuring calm words she might not have fully believed but spoke anyway. Clay fed the stove, fetched water, kept watch like a sentry at the foot of the bed. Outside the wind howled harder, snow piling against the windows, sealing them in together. 3 adults bound by one small life, fighting for space in his lungs. Clay's thoughts drifted to the doctor in town, old Doc Hensley, who'd delivered half the county's babies and buried nearly as many. Even if Clay saddled up now, the roads would be near impassable by morning. Still, he told Sarah he'd ride if the boy didn't turn soon. Christmas or not, a man didn't sit idle when a child was hurting. Sarah's eyes filled. Gratitude and terror mixed together until they were the same thing. Somewhere near midnight, the boy's breathing eased just a little. Not enough to rest easy, but enough to let everyone draw a careful breath. Madison slumped into a chair, exhaustion finally catching her. Clay poured her coffee from Sarah's pot, strong and bitter, thanking her quietly. She looked at him then, really looked, seeing not just the rancher she'd come to visit for a holiday adventure, but a man rooted deep in this land and its people. A man who couldn't turn away even if he wanted to. That realization shifted something between them, unspoken but heavy. Madison asked what would happen if the boy worsened. Clay answered honest. He'd ride at first light no matter the storm. Sarah listened from the doorway, clutching a small wooden cross, her lips moving in silent prayer. The storm came in full before dawn. Wind screaming like a living thing, snow blinding, the kind of weather that made even seasoned cowhands think twice. Thomas's fever spiked again, his small body shuddering, and Clay didn't hesitate. He told Madison to stay with Sarah and the boy, to keep doing what she'd been doing. Then he pulled on his coat and gloves, every movement sharp with purpose. Madison caught his arm, fear flashing across her face, telling him it was dangerous, that people died out there in storms like this. Clay nodded, knowing she was right, but danger didn't excuse inaction, not when a child's life hung in the balance. He kissed her forehead quick, a promise and a goodbye wrapped into one moment, then stepped into the white fury. The ride to town was brutal, wind cutting through layers, snow stinging like thrown gravel. Clay leaned low over his horse's neck, trusting the animal's instincts as much as his own. The world narrowed to survival, and the thought of a small boy struggling for breath. Memories surfaced unbidden, his own childhood Christmases, hard but warm with family. His father's voice steady as the land itself, teaching him that a man's worth showed most when things went wrong. By the time the lights of town finally broke through the storm like distant stars, Clay's hands were numb, his face burned raw. But relief surged through him, stronger than pain. Doc Hensley didn't argue when Clay burst into his house. Half frozen and wild-eyed, the old man grabbed his bag and coat without a word, muttering about stubborn ranchers and winter foolishness. The return trip felt longer, the storm refusing to ease, but dawn crept pale across the sky by the time they reached the widow's place. Inside, Madison looked up from the bed, exhaustion carved deep into her features, but hope flared when she saw the doctor. Sarah nearly collapsed with relief. Doc Hensley set to work, his movements practiced and sure, administering medicine, listening, adjusting the stove heat, after what felt like an eternity. He straightened and said the boy would live, weak but alive. With care and rest, the room sagged with relief. Sarah sank to her knees, tears soaking the floor. Whispering thanks to anyone listening, Madison pressed a hand to her mouth. Eyes shining, Clay leaned against the wall, legs trembling now that the fight was over. Christmas morning light filtered through the window, pale and quiet, touching the tree Sarah had decorated with simple ribbons. The night had taken everything light and easy about the holiday and replaced it with something heavier, something truer. Clay looked at Madison, then at Sarah and her sleeping child, understanding, settling deep. This land didn't allow for half measures. Love and responsibility were woven together out here, and whether he was ready or not, this Christmas had drawn a line that would shape everything that came after. Christmas morning unfolded slow and unsure, like the land itself was testing whether it was safe to breathe again. The storm had spent its fury and moved on, leaving the world wrapped in white and silence so deep it rang in Clay Dawson's ears. Inside the widow's house, the stove gave steady heat, and the doctor's words still hung in the air. The boy would live. Those 3 words, heavier than any gift a man could place under a tree. Sarah sat beside Thomas's bed, brushing damp hair from his forehead, her face drawn but softer now, peace fighting its way back into her eyes. Madison moved quietly, cleaning, straightening, doing small things that mattered more than they looked, and Clay watched both women from the doorway, feeling the weight of a night that had peeled his life open and shown him truths he could no longer ignore. When Doc Hensley finally left, promising to return in a day or 2 if the roads allowed, Clay walked him out, the cold biting clean and sharp after the heat of the house. The old doctor paused before mounting up, studying Clay with a look that saw more than most, said it was a good thing to be needed, but a dangerous thing to belong too deeply to one place. Clay nodded, not sure if the words were a warning or a blessing. Back inside, Madison stood by the window, looking out over the snow-covered fields like she was measuring something invisible. When she turned, her eyes held a sadness that hadn't been there before. She said softly that she'd never felt so useful, or so out of place. In all her life they spoke in low voices, so as not to wake the boy. Madison telling Clay how the night had changed her, how she'd always thought of his ranch as an escape, a holiday from meetings and concrete and endless noise, but now she saw it as a responsibility, a calling that didn't shut off for Christmas or love or convenience. Clay listened, every word landing heavy and true. He told her he'd never asked her to fit into this life, never expected her to trade her world for his. Madison smiled, sad and brave, saying love wasn't about what was asked, but what was understood. She reached for his hand, squeezing it once, then letting go. And in that small gesture, Clay felt the future shift, not breaking, but bending into a shape he hadn't planned. Sarah stirred from her vigil and joined them, her voice steadier now, thanking Madison again and again, saying she didn't know what would have happened without her. Madison shook her head, saying she'd only done what anyone should, but Clay saw how deeply the gratitude settled in her, the kind that came from knowing you'd mattered in a way that money or titles never could. Sarah spoke then about loneliness, about how after her husband died, the ranch next door had felt like another planet, close but unreachable. This night had broken that distance, she said, not just with Clay, but with the world. Clay felt a warmth spread through him, realizing that neighborliness wasn't a duty, it was a lifeline, especially in places where the land demanded so much and gave back only if you stayed together later. When Thomas woke, weak but smiling, Clay fetched a small carved horse from his coat pocket, something he'd picked up months ago at a trading post. Never knowing why, he handed it to the boy, who clutched it like treasure, his thin fingers curling tight. Sarah's eyes filled again, but this time with something brighter than fear. Clay told the boy he'd have to grow strong to ride a real one someday. The promise, simple but powerful. Madison watched from the doorway, tears sliding free, understanding that some bonds formed in moments of crisis lasted longer than plans made in comfort by afternoon. Clay walked Madison back to his house, the snow crunching clean underfoot. The ranch looked the same as it had the day before, fences stretching wide, cattle moving slow, but everything felt different, like the land itself had shifted its weight. Inside, Madison packed her things without rushing, each folded shirt a quiet goodbye. She said she'd head back to the city once the road cleared. Clay nodded, helping carry her bag, words failing them both. At the door, she turned and kissed him, long and gentle, saying this Christmas had given her more than she'd expected. even if it had also taken something away. Clay watched her walk down the path, her figure small against the vast white, feeling loss and gratitude twist together until he couldn't tell them apart. The days that followed settled into a new rhythm. Clay checked on Sarah and Thomas often, mending small things around her place, sharing meals, laughter returning slow but sure. The widow's house felt less lonely, and Clay's own place felt fuller for it, even in Madison's absence. Letters came from the city, careful and kind, full of warmth but honest about distance. Clay read them by lamplight, accepting that love didn't always mean staying. Sometimes it meant letting go without bitterness. Christmas faded into memory, but its lesson remained, clear as the winter sky after a storm when spring finally hinted at the horizon, snow melting into mud and promise. Clay stood on his porch, watching Sarah and Thomas walk the fence line, the boy laughing, stronger with each step. The land stretched wide and patient before him, unchanged yet always demanding. Clay felt ready in a way he hadn't before, not because life had grown easier, but because he'd learned what mattered most when the night broke and help was needed. That Christmas had not been quiet or simple, but it had been true, and in the West, where the land tested every man, truth was the greatest gift of all.